Digital Foundry is proudly sponsored by MSI's new range of next-generation QD OLED gaming monitors, available in two sizes, 32-inch 4K 240Hz and 27-inch 1440p 360Hz. These are some of the best monitors we've ever tested, with incredible motion clarity, 1000 nit HDR highlights, OLED burn-in protection, AI features and genuinely game-changing performance. Check the video description below to learn more, and for UK viewers, enter to win an MSI MPG 271 QRX 360Hz QD OLED.
Rise of the Ronin is an open-world samurai action RPG and perhaps developer Team Ninja's most ambitious project to date, building on the same in-house technology that powered Wolong Fallen Dynasty and Stranger of Paradise. The pure focus on PlayStation 5 development as an exclusive makes it a more tantalizing effort than usual. Farewell multi-platform development and goodbye last-gen console support. Rise of the Ronin sets out to fine-tune the experience for PS5 as a single hardware target. To that end, fully open-world streaming is incorporated into the engine this time, along with ray tracing features, notably ray-traced reflections. And yet, even with these engine breakthroughs, Team Ninja has a huge challenge to undertake here. In following 2020's Ghost of Tsushima, Sucker Punch's own excellent open-world samurai action game, the bar is set very high for visual quality. Even 4 years later, Ghost of Tsushima's beautifully rendered landscapes, its materials and effects still make it one of the best looking games on PS4 and PS5. Flash forward to Rise of the Ronin today then, just how does the technology fare by comparison? Secondly, with 3 modes to choose from, a performance mode, a graphics mode, and a ray tracing mode, which is the best way to enjoy the game? And finally, does any one of these options make 60 frames per second at all viable? Let's find out. The good stuff first. Rise of the Ronin takes the winning Dark Souls blueprint for its combat, its targeting system and the camera, but puts a particular focus on counterattacks. Much like Wolong Fallen Dynasty, victory crucially depends on landing a precise counter with the triangle button. The more counters in a row you nail, the lower the opponent's stamina gauge falls until they're left open to a finishing move. It's brilliantly executed, it's addictive, and rewards paying close attention to the rhythm of an opponent's strikes. The tight action, the huge wealth of weapons, and the ability to switch characters and playstyles are Rise of the Ronin's best qualities. Zooming out, all this combines with a broad open-world design, recreating a mid-19th century Japan with a sprawling map. As a wandering Ronin, you take on quests, with the story branching out depending on which allegiance you pick. The quest structure is rather transparent here though, one that's more Assassin's Creed than Dark Souls in nature. And by that I mean, objective markers fill the map, often explicitly spelling out where to go next. And to bridge the gap between locations, horses, grappling hooks, and gliders are offered up to help you get from A to B quickly. That's the setup. Rise of the Ronin's combat, the story, and the RPG elements all show Team Ninja working at its very best. But the new twist, the open world aspect, is perhaps less polished in its delivery. Especially coming from a big open world game like Ghost of Tsushima on PS5, it seems the addition of world streaming across miles of terrain isn't always an elegant fit for the engine. On the plus side first, character models are often beautifully detailed. We get high quality shadows, adjusting with the changing time of day to give a convincing day-night cycle. Also, the linear missions, especially the tutorial, put some beautiful effects in view. The snow physics allow you to procedurally leave a trail on the ground, for example. We also get a great use of volumetric effects in interiors, like this smoke effect filling out the cabins of the Black Ship, or the haze surrounding the lanterns of Yokohama. It's lovely stuff. And lastly, using the ray tracing mode, specific areas use ray traced reflections. This pond ahead of the shrine is one rare spot where ray tracing is applied, while the game's other two modes resort to a screen space reflection technique instead. Sadly though, the ray tracing mode is very limited in where it applies the effect, and in fact, larger water bodies like rivers, oceans, and even varnished interior floors instead often resort to SSR just like the other modes. Which brings us to a few of the negatives. Firstly, asset pop-in is often quite visible, especially in busy city areas or while riding quickly on horseback. Regardless of which mode you pick, a lot of these elements draw in very close to the camera, whether it be foliage, shadow maps, lighting, or NPCs. In fairness, in confined spaces, Rise of the Ronin's visuals do impress, and the technology here often capably realizes the team's art direction with beautifully lit materials, but on the open road, there are often these distractions, and again, no mode avoids it. Added to that, textures use a low-grade anisotropic filtering setting, which means surfaces appear blurred at the typical viewing angle. Every one of the game's three modes uses it, and it resembles a 4x anisotropic filtering setting we'd see on a PC game. All of this gives Rise of the Ronin a distinctly last-gen appearance at times, as harsh as that sounds, which is compounded by issues in image quality and frame rate as well. Notably, on the performance and ray tracing modes, most open areas render at a native resolution of 1080p or under, creating a soft end result. And in using AMD's FSR2 technology to reconstruct the image to 4K, artifacts are often visible on swaying foliage. And lastly, as you might have noticed, there are issues with the frame rate. No mode on PS5 is able to perfectly lock at 60 FPS, though as I'll get to, some modes get much closer to it than others. To the comparisons, and first up, let's pick through what each of Rise of the Ronin's graphics modes do. There are three modes to choose from for 60 FPS performance, graphics, and ray tracing. And up front, I'd highly recommend setting it to the performance mode to lock down the tightest frame rate. The reason being, to the naked eye, the benefits of the graphics and ray tracing modes are often not worth the frame rate penalty. At a basic level, all suffer from the same visible pop-in, and each uses the same low texture filtering setting on the ground. Also, all modes offer a separate 30 FPS cap option if you'd prefer to lock it at half the refresh. That is barring the 60 FPS performance mode, of course. The downside is, enabling this 30 FPS cap in the graphics and ray tracing modes has the game run with uneven frame pacing. Here it is in action. Note the frame time graph on the left and the visible judder as the reading jumps between 16, 33 and 50 milliseconds. Also unfortunate is that this 30 FPS cap, with its frame pacing issues, kicks in for cutscenes on every mode, even if gameplay is set to run unlocked to 60. So there's no escape from it, even in the best case. On the surface, all three modes run with identical settings in world detail, textures, lighting, and shadows. Or put another way, many of the core building blocks of the world are precisely matched. Still, the graphics mode offers two key benefits in image quality and screen space reflections. Firstly, it runs at a dynamic 1512p, which is a visible step up over the dynamic 1152p targets used for the performance and ray tracing modes. In truth though, it's rare to see any of these modes really hit their maximum values. The graphics mode, for example, usually runs at the lower end of its range at 1152p, and then the ray tracing mode goes to 810p lowest, though typically settles at 900p. And lastly, the performance mode on left often runs at numbers like 936p, just above the ray tracing mode on average. In short then, for the best average pixel count, you'll want to use that graphics mode. Zooming in and comparing to the performance mode, the image is marginally sharper, and the higher base pixel count helps alleviate some of FSR2's reconstruction artifacts, though you will need a VRR-compatible display in place to deal with its many sub-60 FPS drops. The second big difference is in reflections. Of course, the ray tracing mode adds ray traced reflections. It's a huge win where it's applied, though again, it only affects very specific spots. Bizarrely, the ray tracing mode resorts to an SSR technique for most of the game's other water bodies, and the quality of that SSR is lower than both the performance mode and the graphics modes. Check out the reflection of the lanterns on the floor here as an example. If we freeze frame, the graphics mode in the middle comes out best with the sharpest SSR setting, the performance mode runs at a lower setting, and then the ray tracing mode runs at a step below that. In the end, the occasional use of ray tracing for reflections in the tutorial is impressive, but its application across the world just isn't widespread enough to make the ray tracing mode worth using. I also tried to find any sign of ray traced global illumination, ambient occlusion, or shadows, but yes, ray traced reflection seems to be the focus for this mode. So it's a peculiar set of options to have, and in summary, you get an image quality boost and better SSR on the graphics mode, and the occasional use of ray traced reflections in the ray tracing mode. But beyond that, there really isn't much to split the three. On to performance, and where better to start than the FPS performance mode. The 30 FPS frame rate cap is disabled here by default, obviously, opening the graph to a full 60 FPS range of motion. Across the game's first 6 hours of play, it's reasonably well held too, but not flawless. Even in the best case, expect to see that 60 FPS line interrupted with occasional drops to the mid-50s. Just as new assets or effects stream in, or just as the camera moves in a sudden direction, forcing the DRS to adjust, the frame rate will briefly lurch. Hardly ideal then, but it's still the best way to enjoy Rise of the Ronin's timing-sensitive combat. Landing a counter successfully depends so heavily on this smooth visual feedback. It genuinely helps, and what we have here is significantly better performance than the other two modes. That said, be braced for sustained GPU side drops as well. Performance goes to between 50 to 60 FPS when pushed with taxing open areas, and worse still, there are dips under that to 45 FPS while gliding over busy city areas. As ever, the streaming of assets, the NPCs, seem to be a big issue here. Anyone using a VRR compatible display will see this as an ideal range. It's salvageable, but for those without VRR support, expect to see judder around these stress points and occasional lurches in general play. Next along is the graphics mode, easily the most taxing option of the trio. First, for posterity, here it is running with its default 30 FPS cap. It locks to 30 FPS effectively enough, all of which is a shame because we're saddled with the uneven frame pacing as well. It could have been a handy option to have, given the massive sub 60 FPS lurches while running unlocked. Instead, removing that 30 FPS option gives us a wide range of results. As a general rule of thumb, it hovers at between 40 to 50 FPS, with rare moments taking us into the high 30s. It almost appears like 45 FPS is the target here, with the resolution dynamically adjusting to keep us fixed at this middle ground number. Whether it's the bustling city areas or combat, so much of play hovers at this mark. VRR compatible displays will struggle to fully turn this around, I think. At the extremes, when it goes to the 30 FPS region, we're very much outside the ideal range, and you'll notice judder regardless. So whether this huge frame rate hit is worth running at a higher resolution, at up to 1512p, and the better SSR setting is entirely up to you. Better that we do have this graphics option than not. It's just a shame that we can't have the game running at 60 FPS with any better image quality. The final option then is the ray tracing mode. In effect, its frame rate falls between the other two modes, just below the performance mode but often above the graphics option. The only exceptional moments, inevitably, involve its ray traced reflections where they genuinely appear. In the tutorial area, for example, the pond here has performance plummet to the 30s and the low 40s on the RT mode. By comparison, switching to the graphics mode, we're happily sitting at 45 FPS with its SSR technique. And then, switching to the performance mode, you get a tighter 60 FPS lock instead here, with a low quality SSR setting. To put the rest of the game into perspective, let's go to a three-way split. Emerging to the Yokohama region for the first time, the ray tracing mode gets close to the 60 FPS line of the performance mode. It's often only just shy of that top line, settling in the high 50s, but again, this is perfect VR display territory. You'll even see huge segments of combat or exploration run at 60 FPS with one-off dips, just like the performance mode. Given that ray tracing mode's actual use of ray tracing is uncommon, and that most other settings are a match, it makes sense to see parity with the performance mode. It's only when we enter the city areas that the ray tracing mode shows a limit. Drops to the mid-40s are possible, and, surprisingly, complex interiors put us closer to the graphics mode's 45 FPS line. There are many cases, in fact, where the ray tracing mode dips heavily without any real obvious cause. In exploring the lower levels of the Black Ship, for example, and given the low native resolution of the ray tracing mode, there's no clear reason why the frame rate is taking such a nosedive, especially so when the settings are so similar. We see it time and time again around detailed interiors or big cities. The ray tracing mode's frame rate drops hard, but in the open outdoors, it gets closer to 60 FPS. The point being, the performance mode, the FPS mode, wins out as the more practical balance. It's more consistent, and for getting the most visual features with the tightest 60 FPS lock, it's an easier one to recommend. That's the lowdown on Rise of the Ronin. As an open world effort from Team Ninja, the results are mixed, but the winning combat, characters, and RPG systems add huge value to the package. The main frustration really is that a perfect 60 FPS is out of reach here. Its performance mode is the best option of the bunch, but it still suffers from drops and a blurry image to boot. Meanwhile, the graphics mode is the visual purist's best option. The resolution is boosted there in exchange for a wildly variable frame rate, but again, pairing that with a 30 FPS cap gives you uneven frame pacing. There's no ideal solution, in other words. To make the best of it, the 60 FPS performance mode makes most sense, even if it doesn't flatter the presentation of the open world. Speaking more generally on the game itself, it's clear Sucker Punch's superb Ghost of Tsushima is a very hard act to follow for any open-world samurai action. Even with the 4-year gap between the two games, plus the dedicated PS5 development, Rise of the Ronin doesn't always show an obvious generational leap. The game's visuals impress at times on the open road, but really, a large part of its appeal is inherent in its setting, and the time in history it's trying to recreate. Working against that is the game's image quality, variable frame rate, and pop-in, all of which at times distract from the spectacle. More often than not, it's actually the linear missions, the interiors, that showcase its technology better. Contained areas play to Team Ninja's strengths in offering detailed playgrounds that set the stage for precise, challenging combat. And the team's pedigree here is truly clear to see. For the combat alone, and especially if you're a fan of Ninja Gaiden or Wolong Fallen Dynasty, it's worth seeing past some of the game's rougher edges. But that's all from me today. If you did find this video useful or insightful in any way, feel free to like or subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell for instant notifications as any new video lands. To get a high quality version of this video, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch directly, you know where to find me. But from me for now, thanks for watching.